Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, as always. I'm thrilled to introduce you to our guest today. But before I do, I want to thank some folks that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com, Quinn the Eskimo Company. This is our source for brass and wind instruments, both new and used for our students and for our teachers. We highly recommend them, and we ask you to give them a call. We are Willow Music, formerly the Grant Park Academy of the Arts, and we are the next generation of music instruction. We are able to help you on Zoom or in person, violin, piano, drums, woodwinds, brass, and voice. Just let us know what you need. Please give us a call and check us out at willowschoolgeorgia.com. Also, we'd like to make sure you know about Truer MU. If you are not ready to take a lesson with a person, we do have video instruction for you in beginning jazz and blues. We're very excited about this. And in addition, there's a community you can join. So please check us out at truermu.com. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to a man who was one of my teachers as a piano player. I've had a lot of fantastic teachers, but this was the teacher that actually put me over the rim and helped me actually become the piano player that I wanted to be. His name is Dr. Geoff Haydon. Dr. Haydon, welcome.
Welcome. Good to see you, Adam.
It's good to see you too. Yes, although we've kept in touch, we haven't actually seen each other in a number of years, so it's really great to see you again.
That's true. I can't quite remember the last time we saw each other in person. Maybe you can.
No, not at all. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But I do remember many happy days in that studio behind you, so it's really great to see that too.
Yeah.
For the folks that don't know, because I know you, I've got an unfair advantage. You teach at Georgia State University. You're the coordinator of the piano department there. That's correct, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so to tell people a little bit more about you, you are a pianist. You've studied jazz and classical, and you teach both. And as a jazz musician, you've worked with folks like Joe Henderson and Bill Watrous and Randy Brecker. And as a classical musician, you know, you've got credentials and you've played all over the place doing what classical musicians do. So I'd like to know, the reason I'm especially interested in talking to you tonight and introducing you to people is because you have studied jazz and classical at such a high level both. First of all, before we talk about what that is and what that means, could you tell us how you got to be that piano player?
Well, I got there from being interested, I think, in music at a very young age, obviously, like younger than I can really remember, because I think I remember making sounds on the piano from the time I can remember being in existence, 3 or 4 years old, actually, and begging my mother to take lessons and her saying, no, you're too young. And eventually she gave in. So she tells me when I was 5 years old, something like that. But I say all of that because, you know, I always wanted to do what my older brother and sister were doing, I think. And my mother played too, and my aunt, and a lot of people. So I looked up to all of them. But I guess the difference between me and them was that I wanted to play what I was hearing rather than what they were reading when they were playing, or, you know, what I was hearing on the radio, or even what I was hearing from them. So I became somebody who learned, I think, first by ear, but at 5 years old, I got formal piano lessons. So I was taught to read and whatever, but I resisted that, I think, for quite some time before I ever really got serious about learning to be a good reader and getting the more, I guess you might call it formal training. But so you put those two things together, and I think that has a lot to do with who I am. I mean, that's a short answer to your question.
Mm-hmm. Well, we could go into a little more depth. When you were a teenager, were you mostly playing classical music, or were you mostly playing jazz or rock and roll? What were you doing?
Yeah, when I was a teenager, and I guess you're talking about, let's say, from about 7th or 8th grade on for me, I was, my brother played in a rock band back in those days, so I wanted to play in his band, and he played piano too. So you know, you couldn't have two piano players. So I learned to play the drums, and so I was a drummer a lot of the time that I was growing up. But I was taking piano lessons, so I was studying classical music anyway. That was something that you just did. My mother, I don't know that she insisted on it, but it was pretty much expected. That's what I would do. So I was doing that and playing by ear a bunch and learning to play the blues and listening to a lot of rock and roll. I don't think I was really that interested in classical music until I got into high school. And I was still either a drummer or a keyboard player in rock bands. By that time, my brother had gone on to college. And I did that. But at the same time, I was studying piano with, of all people, my French teacher, who was an organist at a cathedral near Washington, D.C., where I grew up. And he looked at me, and my other teacher, my hometown piano teacher, let's call it, moved away when I was in 8th grade. And this was about 10th grade. And he offered to give me piano lessons, and he did. And he educated me a lot about classical music, took me to my first symphony concert, the National Symphony in Washington, D.C. at the Kennedy Center. I can even remember that Debussy's Afternoon of the Faun was played at that concert. That made that big of an impression on me.
Yeah.
And but anyway, so I got a lot of education from him, I think, about classical music and inspiration for it. And maybe he, convinced me I should be practicing more than I was. That kind of music anyway. And so that's what I was doing when I was a teenager. I was also a tennis player, and I was #1 on my high school team my last couple of years there. So I was pretty serious about that too. So I was doing a lot of stuff.
But when did tennis? We're going to talk about tennis later, but when did tennis? When did music tip the balance?
I would say in my freshman year in college. In other words, when I was 18 and I went away to college, and I left a rock and roll band behind, by the way, to do that, and they weren't real happy that I was leaving. But anyway, because we had money sunk into the group and everything. So.
Oh wow, you were serious.
I guess we all were, but I guess they were more serious than me because I left. But
this was Journey, right? The band Journey.
Yeah, well, no, well, not the Journey, no. Anyway, so yeah, so when I'll never forget. It was the first week or two that I was there at University of Richmond, and I met the piano teacher there, and he auditioned me, and he said, "Okay, well, you should be practicing 3-4 hours a day, and there's no question about it. You could make a place for yourself." So I sat myself down, I think, and I said, "Okay, I'm behind if I'm really going to do this in music." And so I can't do both. I can't do tennis and music. So I decided, looking at the whole thing, about that you peak as a tennis player anywhere from, I don't know, 30 years old to 35, something like that. And then I saw, music, you're going to peak, who knows, but it's downhill after about 35 if you're playing tennis. And it's hopefully a lot later in life that it's downhill for the music thing. And then really the real reason was I just felt like, well, I think I have a lot more going for me in the music field. Basically talent. I think I was more talented in that area than I was in tennis. There was plenty of guys that could beat me in tennis. And once I got to the college level, I was beginning to see that, that would be, I just, wasn't all that special there, but I felt like music had a special calling. Yeah.
But tennis requires quite a work ethic. Did that help you compete when you were in the school?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. The fact that I had been in a lot of tournaments and won and lost in those tournaments, and knew how to prepare and all the rest of that, I think certainly had a positive influence on how I might approach music from a competitive standpoint anyway.
Well, of course, just, I don't know about you, but I feel like when I perform, I'm performing against myself. And if I do well, it's a win. So, there's that aspect is still there, even if you're not in a competition.
Yeah. Well, that's true in any competitive situation. That's what a lot of people don't realize. But, tennis was interesting because that's an individual sport in a way. Well, you can also play doubles, so you can kind of experience a little bit of both. Right. But basically, yeah, you work hard every day and you try to do the best you can, and then the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So then you go out and you play against other people, and you find out how that all stacks up and how your work is doing. And a lot of the same thing happens in music. You work hard, especially as a pianist, and then when you perform, whether it is for your teacher or in a class situation, or literally on a concert stage, you find out pretty quick whether that work is paying off. And what pays off, you remember, and you hold on to it and you keep it. And what doesn't pay off, then you it's back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So we're in college and you're working hard as a classical pianist. Jazz hasn't bit yet?
Well, I would say that no, jazz had, I mean, we all grew up hearing it. And I always played the blues since I was a kid. And I improvised in the blues sense and in a rock and roll sense. And I would get out my mother's 30s and 40s books and play at those things, and that's kind of jazzy, more or less. But no, I wasn't. I had no one to teach me how to approach this music in a formal kind of way until when I went to college. I played. It's funny. I could read. I mean, I knew what chords were, and I could read whatever. And I remember playing with a group in Richmond called the Kings of Swing, and they would. They were kind of a little big band as I remember it, and I would read those charts and play with them, and I think I got to do that a little bit. They actually had an album out and everything, but because I could, and a lot of classical players back then, just piano players in general, it's hard to find somebody that could read chords and understand rhythm and all that. But I was a long ways from really being a good a well-schooled jazz player. So that didn't happen until I got to grad school at University of Texas at Austin. And that's where they had a jazz department where they had 3 big bands. And I started to take courses, and I started to get out into the Austin, Texas jazz community, and play and do gigs. And that's really where, as you know, that's where you really learn how to play. It's what do they call it? The school of hard knocks and
paying dues.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, usually this is more true probably in voice than anything else, but when it comes to jazz or classical, teachers are usually pushing you to decide. Did you get that kind of pressure put on you?
To decide what?
Well, Geoff, this jazz thing is all very well and good, but classical music requires a lot of focus and time, and perhaps you should be putting your time into that. Did you ever get that conversation?
I really didn't. I never got that as an undergraduate, but I actually spent most of my time practicing classical music as an undergraduate. I actually gave up improvising for a while because I had a whole lot of bad habits. And I felt like many of those bad habits were kind of steeped in an unorthodox self-taught way of playing, which was all wrapped up in my improvising. So when I got to Texas, Austin, it's a fairly young faculty there. I was studying with Greg Allen, who was just early 30s. And he had just won the Rubinstein competition himself, and he loved. I remember looking on his shelf, and he had Chick Corea and Keith Jarrett and all kinds of people, in his albums, and no, they were excited to have somebody there that was interested and was doing that, and it was Greek to them in a way. In other words, they didn't do that, and so they had a certain amount of respect. So I don't think anybody discouraged me at all. I was still taking care of business,
right,
with my classical stuff. So if I wasn't, I probably would have gotten that conversation.
Well, before we move on to I'm enjoying this biography, but before we move on, I'm really intrigued by this idea that you had improvised a certain way and that you felt like you needed to stop that and unlearn that. It can be kind of difficult going back into old patterns that you've discarded, but are you at a place where you're comfortable to show us anything about what you're talking about?
Well, you mean in terms of what I was doing wrong, or what do you,
Yeah, in terms of what you were doing that dissatisfied you, that you actually felt yourself, not even have a teacher tell you, that you felt yourself was not working for you.
yeah, I'm not sure how to get me in this picture and my keyboard to maybe
I can see your
demonstrate.
keyboard just fine.
But I mean, okay, well, I mean, basically, as a growing up teenager, I'd never really sat down and really practiced scales, but I sure could play a blues scale, you know. But and I would do things like slide my second finger from G flat to G, you know, so a very unorthodox kind of fingering way, and then I might, you know, well, that sounded like a pretty good idea in a Bach invention or something, you know? So I might do that fingering because I didn't know any better. I definitely remember my first audition. I played the first three-part invention for the guy at University of Richmond, and his wife was there, and she was a pianist too. She sat there, and they were both new to the school as well as me. We both all arrived at the same time, and I remember when I got done with that Bach invention, he didn't say much, but she said, oh, "That's very interesting fingering," you know, which you know didn't. That I think that went pretty much as a negative rather than a positive. But anyway, so there was that. And to tell you the truth, I went on to Aspen Music Festival the summer of my sophomore year, and that was where I began. There was a Schnabel student there named Albie Circo, and he had he's the one that, you know, basically taught me a lot about. He was a chop doctor more or less, and he said, no, your fingers they're really not moving correctly at all, and you need to sit down and practice scales, and you probably need to take it about this tempo. And that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
I would sit there and play through my scales at that tempo, which probably took me, I don't remember, an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. Every morning, it's at about 7, to get all that stuff corrected. And I always knew I was coming back to the jazz and the improv. I didn't give it up and thinking, oh, well, this is it, it's gone. I always knew I could do it. I just felt like I can't get out of this, you know, I can't control what I'm doing yet, I suppose. And I wanted to get to a point where I could control it.
It may surprise a lot of our viewers who are really not even pianists, or maybe they're just casual pianists, that these tiny little differences in what you're doing with your hands could matter so much. That, well, just the minutia of playing the piano, you're describing it a little bit. I mean, most people would say, oh, that slide down to from G flat to G, that sounded great. But you're saying, well, you know, that's fine, but I'm just sliding down a hill on a couple of skis and I got no control, essentially.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not that I don't do that even now, because I can do that now, and I might. But I know a little bit more about why and I don't know how I'm doing it than I did at that particular time. I think back then it was an indication of a lot of bad habits rather than anything intentional.
Well, it wasn't a choice, apparently. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
I looked up Albie Circo. He was quite a character. I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about him. Did you find him a character, or was he just really just a passing thing for you?
Well, that, you know, that's a, you know, it's a little bit loaded there, character. You know, he was, yeah, I mean, everybody could say that about anybody in a certain respect, but no, Albie Circo was a very strong personality who had definite what's the word, ideas about how something should be done, and if it wasn't done that way, then it, you know, it wasn't going to work. I felt when looking back on it that you know, he had a certain way, certain ideas about how the music should be played and how it should be taught and whatever. But he was also a lot of fun. He was very funny when he would give a lesson, and he gave lessons in the old European style of teaching, which Schnabel did too, and many other teachers did. And that is to say that all lessons were open, so all your friends would be sitting around in the room with you, and a lesson was usually no less than 2 hours. So you didn't get up there and, okay, I'm sorry, it's 4 o'clock, see you later. He kept you as long as he needed to keep you. In that 2 hours, you might get through one page of music.
Yeah.
So it was a very stringent, kind of very thorough approach. And usually you would get a certain amount of verbal abuse along the way. That he would I don't know, I would call it verbal abuse, and today I'm not sure that it would even be allowed, because we've come a ways in terms of what people can and can't do, but back then it didn't bother me, but it did bother some people.
Sure. Well, I mean, putting aside whether, verbal abuse, the ends justify the means, I certainly know you don't teach that way. But do you believe there is basically a right way and a wrong way, the way he did, or that this is the way it ought to be? I don't recall your teaching that way.
Well, no, but I had some other teachers, and I learned about a more positive way to get things across to people from a sort of different school of teachers. Maybe Greg Allen being one of those, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, a teacher has many different keys in their pocket. It's like a whole big,
Ring of keys.
a bunch of keys, and each student, usually you have to try all these different keys until you unlock what's inside of them. That's my analogy for it anyway. So I think on the key rings of the past, if you go back and look at the past, let's go 100 years back in pedagogy, it was that key ring had less keys on it, and a lot of those keys were just beat it out of the student rather than pull it out of the student, and that's just was the accepted way you did it. And fortunately, I think in a way we've come a long ways and along those lines. And but for a little while, that's I would probably have ended up teaching like he did. I saw him get results. I saw that kind of approach get results. But then I saw other approaches get results, and I decided, well, I like this better because I feel like I can get the same results, but I don't have to, put people through what he was putting those through. There's another guy named Leonard Shore who was a Schnabel student too, from the same age, same generation. And Leonard Shore was famous for, literally reducing, people to tears. Both male and female on the bench, and some people gave up piano. So yeah. I didn't feel like that's not what music was ever to me. Music's for everybody, and it's for everybody to enjoy the journey that we all go on to try to do our best. And I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to you. And you're in college and you're studying jazz and classical. You went on to graduate school. When were you playing with people like Joe Henderson? I mean, did that happen after school, or how did you?
No, that happened when I was at University of Texas. I was in Austin, and I just happened to be a piano player that was available to play with him. That time. It's not like I wish. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like wow. Joe Henderson was one of my good buddies that he's calling all the time. But I mean, I got to play Recordame with Joe Henderson, and I'm sure Recordame. Yeah. And that's one of his famous tunes that's in the real book that we all play, and that was a real, what's the word? Exciting moment. Exciting.
Will you play for us that song?
Well, I don't know if I remember the.
Yeah, right. Awesome. Okay, so of course, right now you've been the coordinator at Georgia State for a long time. How long have you been coordinator there?
Boy, you really want me to tell you?
Well, I guess I'm trying to bridge the gap between end of school and what you do now.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is I don't remember exactly. Well, I think Okay, the coordinator of the piano department before me was somebody named Ruth McDonald. And oddly enough, she was somebody else that knew how to play jazz,
Hmm.
sort of in her own way. She was a grande dame sort of figure that was there. And before her was like the guy whose place I took named John Schneider. But anyway, Ruth, I believe the year was 1991. I
Okay.
think that's when she left. She was forced to retire because they had forced retirement in those days at 70 years old. And she, uh, so she handed it to me.
Now, what had you been doing prior to that?
Just being a piano faculty member and
Mhm.
tuning pianos for the school. I was also the piano tuner, as well as a an assistant professor and teacher and
So
performer.
you've been in academia pretty much the whole way through.
Yeah, I wasn't even finished with my doctorate at that time. I didn't finish my doctorate until 1992.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and at the same time, of course, I know you because this is where I come into the story a little bit. I remember you gigging around Atlanta at the same time, so you were always working as a professional jazz
Yeah,
musician.
yeah, because I'd already been working in Austin in the 80s. Austin, Texas. I whatever you call it, I got my real experience there, and I'd done a lot of playing in Austin. So and I'd learned from a lot of musicians, a lot of great jazz musicians from there. I'd say that most of my education happened on the street in Austin. I got some out of the jazz program, but at University of Texas, I was mostly a classical major, and I just took the jazz studies courses, but I wasn't really a jazz major. But aside all of that, when it came time to take the job at Georgia State, I had to make a decision about, well, I mean, do I really want to go to another city, and be a faculty member, or do I want to stay in Austin? And because Austin was a good place, but I didn't have a job. I wasn't finished with my doctorate, and here I had a job kind of being offered to me. So that's sort of a no-brainer. But I also felt like, well, I've pretty much played all the gigs that I can play in Austin, and I can continue to do those gigs. And I played with pretty much the jazz community there. So it sounded right. I'm go to Atlanta, and it looked like that was a level up at least coming out of Austin, and it certainly was. As it turned out, that was the right thing to do. There was a whole nother jazz community waiting here. They weren't waiting, but that they were here, and lots of gigs to play and lots of great musicians to learn from, and that did happen. Yeah.
Okay, so you are really, it's very rare to have somebody who has studied jazz and classical at the level that you have. You really have, I'm not going to use words like master because it would embarrass you, but what I'm basically saying is, you could pass for a professional jazz musician or a professional classical musician at a high level. And I want to know what that does to you as a person. I mean, very few pianists get to be that. So do you have a perspective on how that changes your brain?
Well, I don't think it changes my brain. I mean, I'm still me. So the only thing that does, maybe there's a perspective from the other side in terms of how people perceive me, but from how I perceive myself, no, I tell people. Some people do ask me sometimes, well, uh, you play classical, you play both of these. How do you switch gears? What exactly how? And I tell them, I don't switch gears. I'm just playing music, and it's all music to me. So, and the reason I bring that up is to answer your question is, no, I'm just trying to do the best, be the best that I can, and to continue to grow. To tell you the truth, I would put it this way. Now, it wasn't as clear, let's say, some years ago, but now it's very clear to me that all I'm trying to do is become fluent in the language of music. And it just so happens that this instrument is mostly how I translate or how I express that language. And so, it's almost as if, you study Chinese, and at first it's It's a struggle to get a few phrases out, and the next thing you know, you're just expressing whatever's on your mind. And that's what I think music is. And either you give a speech that's been written ahead of time, or you tell a story or whatever, which is a lot like what classical music is, or you create your own story, either based on an already preconceived story like we do with jazz tunes, or you literally improvise something completely your own.
And yet the initial step is different. Not every actor who likes to act on stage likes to improvise. What's going on here? Where's the difference lie?
Well, I like to put that in terms of two things: what I call an artist and an artisan. You know, those two terms.
Okay, please say
So,
more.
okay, so I think to be an artist, okay, is where you're making the decisions and you're creating whatever it is that you create, hopefully according to your feelings at the moment, more or less. So therefore, if I'm playing a Chopin ballade, or I don't know, a Rachmaninoff etude, or whatever I'm playing, I'm making decisions as an artist if it's a solo piano piece, and it doesn't matter that those notes were put on the page by somebody else. I'm getting to interpret those notes based on my feelings about how I want to put that across. And that's going to change from one moment to the next. That's being an artist. I do the same thing. Obviously that transfers over to creating your own jazz solo over Autumn Leaves, or doing something else. But anyway, that's being an artist. And we have to know the difference of when it's appropriate that we be an artist and when it's appropriate that we be an artisan. Well, what's an artisan? Well, an artisan is someone who is hopefully has a pretty good command over the instrument or whatever they do, and a command over the language of music, and they can follow somebody else's instructions, and they can support another artist in what needs to be done. So a good example is, okay, if you take the second violinist in the back of the Atlanta Symphony, the chances are they're not really being an artist. Who's the artist in that group at any given moment? It's the conductor, and they're doing things according to the conductor's wishes and desires and feelings. So there's many times when as a pianist that's what we're doing, and of course there's a gray area in between. For instance, as a jazz musician, I could be playing in a big band, let's say. Well, I'm mostly reading charts, and I'm providing the voicings and the things that you got to do to function in your role. But there might be one moment, it might be 15 seconds and it might be 30 seconds, but where I get to take a solo and it's all mine, and I get to do something artistic. And so I don't know if that answers your question, or if that, but
it really does. What I like is that if originally I thought you were going to say that some people are artisans and some people are artists, but what you're really saying is there's times to be an artisan and times to be an artist. And that's true whether you're playing jazz or classical.
Right. And some people don't figure out, I would say, they don't realize, no, you're not the artist here.
Right.
You should be an artisan at this moment.
Yeah. And maybe it's good to be an artisan when you're studying a piece of classical music, to do due diligence to what might be in the music that you might miss if you're just being your artisty self.
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on how far you take that concept of being an artist, because I have students sometimes that come in here and they play a Mozart sonata, and they add a couple of notes or whatever. They change a rhythm, whatever, and I have to stop them and say, why are you doing that? Well, I just like that. I think it's better that way. Oh, okay. Well, then we have to have a conversation. But anyway,
Yeah. Well, my favorite story, if you don't mind my telling you a story, that really woke me up to this. Jeffrey Kahane came and gave a master class at Oberlin.
Yeah.
He was working with a student. I'm not going to give the student's name, but the student did a great job. He was playing a Mozart Fantasia, and he was beautiful, very artistic, very expressive. And I was very impressed. And then Kahane, congratulated him, and then he sat down and he showed him just what Mozart was up to with his music. And he said, you hear this? And he's doing this. And you can hear this and then this. And all of a sudden, I'm like, what the student had been doing was really nothing more than just artistry. He was showing everybody how expressive he was and that he could play. And it sounded great. But Kahane was actually intelligently communicating Mozart's music to us. And that was like an entire another level up for me. And that was where I started to notice the difference.
Ah, well, then Jeffrey Kahane reached somebody who wasn't even, it was just sitting in the audience.
Yes, he did. Yeah, it was really a tremendous moment for me. When it comes to jazz and classical music, it can be possible. I mean, whenever you live in two worlds that to some extent can sometimes be diametric in their perspectives, if you're in both worlds, sometimes you risk not being seen as part of either one. You can be in both and maybe everybody embraces you in both, or maybe they say, well, you're in that other world and you're just hanging. Which, have you experienced either of those things?
Yeah, I mean, what I experienced myself, from my own personal experience, is that if I'm playing a jazz gig, occasionally whoever's there may be communicating with the audience, usually not me. But anyway, they will at some point say, "Oh, that's Geoff Haydon who's just played that solo or whatever." And by the way, Geoff Haydon is he's a killer classical player, or whatever. He's great. They'll make a big deal about that, and then then another time I'll be playing classical music with somebody, and they'll go, "Oh, well, he can play jazz." Well, the fact is that I don't think that either one of these people have ever really heard me play those other. They haven't really attended a concert, so that assumption is made. So it's a very interesting, and especially from the classical viewpoint, meaning if you're a pretty good classical player or whatever, you do well, and you tell them, "Oh, by the way, I play jazz too," they go, "Wow," and they immediately assume that's really true. Okay, but if you're a jazz player and you play jazz really, really well, and you go, "Oh, yeah, by the way, I can play classical music too," the classical people generally say, "Oh, well, that's nice," but
They don't believe you.
That's right. That's my feeling. I don't really know what people are thinking, but it. And I used to actually give advice to students based on that a little bit. I mean, that if somebody was thinking about, well, where do I go on to grad school? And maybe there's somebody like me where they really have interests in both areas. So what should I major in? Should I go pursue a jazz degree or a classical degree? And I said, well, what do you want to do? You want to get a job teaching in a university, something like that. Well, I said, well, honestly, I think they're going to, 9 out of 10 universities are going to respect that classical degree more than they will the jazz degree. So unless you really want to target teaching only jazz someplace or whatever, then the odds are you probably can get a job teaching either one with a classical degree. So that's maybe getting to be less true as time goes on, which is good. Organizations like maybe the Gen Conference now, but the IAJE before, and just universities in general that are have incorporated jazz programs and so forth, are helping to raise the whatever you call it, the status of the music.
Yeah, well, we should mention historically that at Oberlin College, students were actually expelled from playing jazz. This actually happened. They were inspired by Dave Brubeck's historic concert there, and they got kicked out just for playing it. So we have come a long way anyway. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, that used to be fairly universal at universities, that you go into the concert hall and you're not allowed to play jazz on that nice piano. And if we hear you playing jazz, we're gonna escort you out of the place. I don't know about kick you out of school, but
Yeah, right. Well, now would be a great time, if you feel like it, to play for us, either classical or jazz or both. Is there something you'd like to play?
I don't know. What do you want to hear me play?
I would love to hear you play some classical music first, at least.
All right. Let's see. All right. So maybe. All right. So I always like to play. Chopin always works. So I think I might play a Chopin etude, maybe.
That'd be great.
Maybe Opus 25, number 1.
Thank you. That was very beautiful. And off the cuff, I really appreciate your playing something like that on the spot like that. That was really nice. Would you be interested in playing any jazz for us? Is there a tune you particularly love?
Oh, there's many, as you know.
Of course.
So I don't know. I mean, I almost just have to think of something to play. You know how it is. You just like.
I know, on the spot, it's hard to come up with something.
Wants me to play a tune. Let's do. Well, you mentioned Dave Brubeck, right? So.
Right. Geoff Haydon, in your own sweet way. Thank you. That was really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, tell me, you've mentioned most of your teachers now. Do you have a favorite teacher?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. And I, no, every teacher had a unique input for me. I had, Betty Lee Jenkins when I was a kid. She was my hometown and our church organist, and whatever. Michael Huss was the guy that was my French teacher, that was the organist. And what I didn't tell you is he studied himself with Nadia Boulanger
Oh, wow.
in Paris, and I had he told me about her, but I had no idea who that was back then or how significant that was. Um, and then Richard Becker was the guy who really showed me that I could play classical music. Serco, we've talked about. Greg Allen, we've talked about. There was also a couple of other people at Texas. Well, Nancy Garrett was also my doctorate teacher. So she was very important because she cracked the whip on me and I needed it. And then Danny Martin was another one who was never officially my teacher, but a very good friend. And she was on the piano faculty there too. And she had just as much influence. Amanda Vick Lethko, who was the pedagogy teacher there. Boy, I learned a heck of a lot from her about piano technique and fixed most of those habits I was talking about just based on being in her piano pedagogy class. I never played a single piece for her that I can remember. And yet without her, there's a lot of things that I don't think be able to do. So, and then, there are people, out in the community, but I'll tell you one person that, that I have to mention that, there's several, I think I've learned a lot from Neil Starkey. You've played with him and whatever, but
he's a bass player here in Atlanta.
Yeah, and Neil has never sat down and tried to teach me anything. It's just from playing with him that I've learned a lot from him in a lot of different ways. And another one is, oddly enough, a drummer by the name of Billy Dennitz, who unfortunately is no longer with us. He died now, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. But Billy used to tell me things that nobody else generally out there and on the band, how can you say it, on the job, would do. But Billy really cared, and so he said he did. It's not like he's told me a heck of a lot of things, but every once in a while he would say something, and usually a month or two later. I at first I would say, why is he telling me that? Really? What's he know? He's a drummer. But then, a day or two later, I'd be in the practice room or whatever, and I'd try those things out. I'd say, you know what? He's right. I need to work on this. And then it wasn't long after at some point I'd hear from him, hey, you sound really good. What have you been doing? He would have no idea that he might have had, an important influence on all that. And I'm only sorry that I never got to really tell him.
Yeah. Well, now you're not allowed to mention every single player in the world, but you have to tell us some of your favorite players, either jazz or classical or anyone.
Well, boy, yeah, I'm not allowed to say them all, huh?
No, I'm afraid not. You'll have to pick a couple that are really special to you. I mean, we know there's something to be gained from every player.
Well, I think Glenn Gould's real special.
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about classical players, then Rubin Stein and Glenn Gould. If you said, okay, you can only pick two, who are they? There's many more than that, but
those two are in particular a bit mavericky. They both insisted on continuing to grow and to change how they did things as they got older.
Yes. Yeah, you're right about that. I'm not sure if that's the reason I like them. I think that they, no matter when you listen to them, whether they're the young or the old or whatever, the young Goldbergs or the older Goldberg variations for Glenn Gould or whatever, every single thing they play has a unique kind of personal mark of theirs, and you also get the feeling that, okay, even though this is a recording, it ain't gonna be done like this again. In other words, even if they record it again, and Glenn Gould did prove that, it's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
So,
What about on the jazz side?
well, you have to say Bill Evans. And for the same reason, Bill Evans, it doesn't matter what period you can't say, well, he was kind of young then, so he wasn't quite the same. Like he was the genius that he was from day one. I hear all the same things in his first recordings that I hear later. And yet you can tell that he had a certain growth as a musician as well. But anyway, that, I certainly would mention him. I mean, it's hard to kind of just say one or two people. I mean, Oscar Peterson was somebody who was one of the first jazz pianists I ever was exposed to, and so I was even from. Let me think. I guess that would have happened when I was an undergraduate. I don't remember the exact day. My brother brought a recording, and I sat down and listened. I said, "Oh my God, it can't get any better than that." And then I started literally at one point writing out everything that he played note for note.
Yeah.
And figuring back in those days, and that started when I was an undergraduate. So I even had my eye on it then. But anyway, I wrote out things, and then I sat down, and I was, to my chagrin, it was too hard for me to play. I still had in my future, Liszt etudes and Chopin and whatever, and I didn't have the technique to play what he was doing. And so it got put on the shelf. I mean, at some point you got to give up and figure out another way. And so I knew I got to practice. But anyway, those two guys, after that, it's a matter of jazz history. It's Herbie and Chick Corea. Chick Corea was very, I always was attracted to what he did. I like the Latin influence and all of that sort of thing.
Any non-piano players that particularly help you along?
You mean to listen to?
Well, yeah, or just as a guide, somebody, I mean, lots of people say Miles Davis, even if they're not trumpeters, for instance, but.
Yeah, I don't know that I could really single out any, particular ones. I love singers. I love all the instruments. I mean, it would be hard for me to say, well, it was Louis Armstrong. No, it was Charlie Parker. No, it was, I think it's more important rather than you really got to say, oh, this one guy and that was it, that you continue to grow with being open to all players on all instruments, and you keep listening to them, and one of them will give you a little gem, another one will give you another one, Yeah. And I don't know, maybe, Miles was good because the guy could play really, really great phrases, and every single thing he played made sense on his terms, and and he never, to my knowledge, generally relied on technique to get his point across. And so I think that's a very important thing. Monk, that's another guy that answers to that same exact description as, I mean, how could you say that Monk relied on technique? He didn't have any. Yes, he did. But I mean,
I know what you mean, but the myth is that he didn't have any because he didn't rely on it.
And yeah, I mean, I'm talking about now, flashy technique. Actually, Monk's technique was unique to him. Because technique really is how you do what it is you do. But nevertheless, Monk, it was his ideas that guided his arms. And a lot of people don't play that way. They play just the opposite. They use the tools to then get what's on their mind rather than take what's on their mind to create the tools.
Oh, I got to parse that. Wow.
Yeah, maybe me too.
For me, becoming a piano teacher has been just about the best thing that ever happened to me. I never really thought I would love it so much. Of all the things I teach, I think there's something about teaching the piano for me that I really feel like I'm able to reach people deeper than the piano when I do. So thank you for your example, setting that example. I think probably of all the teachers I had, the way you taught probably influenced me the most. The question I'd like to ask you to bring this to a close is, what would you like people to be teaching? What would you like us to be teaching people about the piano or about music?
Oh boy, you mean my former students?
Well, any of us, I mean, if you look out there and see people teaching piano, what would you change or what do you like that you see?
Well, I think that, yeah, I think what I would like is for, first of all, I don't believe in real teaching, you know. That is to say that I can teach a dog, and I do that sometimes. I love teaching dogs, but human beings are a whole different thing. And what you can do is you can bring somebody, uh, you can help them to create the environment in which they're going to learn. And I think that's what, if that's what teaching is, then yes, I do believe in teaching. But if it's that, okay, here, do it my way. Okay, yeah, that's good. You're doing it my way now. Now let's go on to the next thing. That's not what I want people to do. I think the real joy of music and anything, I don't, it's tennis, golf, whatever, is the joy of discovery. Is I have to do my best to bring my students to the point where they can discover something new every day. I tell them, if you practice today and you didn't discover something new, you probably didn't practice hard enough, or you weren't really involved in what you were doing. And so that's one thing that's very important to me, is that it's a discovery process. And if you're really engaged and you're really looking to discover treasure, then you're going to be committed to the process. And if, on the other hand, all you're out for is the glory of it, and you want people to look at you and say, "Wow, this person is really amazing in what they can do," and that's what fuels what you're doing, I don't think that really leads you to the same thing. You know, it leads you somewhere, and you might get that, but you're going to find out, I think, that you get that glory few and not many times. You know, maybe the big stars do, but that's sort of like owning a yacht or you know,
Yeah.
or a Mercedes. It's like, it's great for the first couple of days, but a week or two later, you're kind of looking for the next thing. But the joy of being able to do what we do, uh, that greets you every single day as a self-fulfilling thing. So such that I tell my students, and you too, I probably told you this at some point. I said, you know, what you can do as a player, okay, and a teacher, uh, you can't buy that. I mean, literally, you can't go to the store and get it off the shelf. I mean, you can pay some money, I suppose, but nevertheless, that money didn't buy anything. All it did was, again, help uh, give you the tools to go then and do the work that then made you what you are. And now that you can do that, you can play tunes, you can bring joy to people's lives, you can do all of those things. Well, guess what? If somebody comes up to you and they've never done any of those things, but they look at you and they go, "I'd like to do that. Can I pay you, you know, $500,000, and if you will be able to give me that by the time, you know, by Monday next week at 5 o'clock?" You know, and of course you're going to go, no amount of money can buy this. Those are the things worth having in life. Those are the things that bring, let's say, true happiness. And I have to tell a quick story about the guy. Speaking of students, I had a guy when I was in Texas that he knew I could play popular music, whatever. He was 39 years old, and I know that because he got in the room with me the first day for the lesson, and I said, "Well, you know, what can I do for you? What do you need?" He goes, "Well," and it was about 6 months until his 40th birthday, I think, and he said, "Well, I want to take piano lessons. I want to learn to play some." He said, "But the real thing I want to do is I want to play Goodness Gracious, Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis by the time I'm 40 years old. And by the way, I'll be 40, you know, in 6 months." So
Did he reach his goal?
I think we did sort of, I mean, what could I do? Okay,
Right.
if that's really what you want to do. But I said, that's it's not quite the way it works. But if that's what you want to do, we'll see. I think it was kind of that thing.
It's an
Now,
entry point.
what's odd about that is, yeah, I taught him maybe for a year or whatever. I think he went. I think after the Jerry Lee Lewis song on his birthday, I think he was on to bowling lessons or something. But but anyway, he wrote a magazine article at least a year or two later, and it was called "Play Misty for Me" or something like that. And what's that? Gentleman's Quarterly maybe, or GQ? I think it was GQ magazine. You look it up, and I think he mentions me in that magazine, but I don't know if I read the article. Okay, I don't know why I got into that. Sorry about that.
No, please. That's fine. Dr. Geoffrey Haydon, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us. And personally, thank you for being in my life and helping me get to where I am. And I continue to use you as an inspiration and a guide. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being a part of my life and joining my party, as they say. That's what Amanda Vick Lethco used to say to us. Is she had this. She was from Vicksburg, Mississippi, and she used to say, "We're sure happy that you came along and joined our party," and that always made me feel good. But that is true. It was great to have you around when you were here, and I will say this, that I always found you to be a very fearless person. You really have, I don't know how to put it, but you're not afraid to do anything. You got a lot of determination. And I knew that probably from day one. You know when the first time I met you was?
Well, I think you're talking about Marion McPartland, right?
That's right.
We met before that, I think.
Well, we may have, but maybe I didn't remember it.
Yeah.
Or it didn't make that big of an impression because, or maybe I did, and I just, that was a long time ago, so I may not be remembering the order of things. But I just remember that I'm sure you remember it very well. They were looking for people. At some point, somebody raised their hand and said, "Marion, we have some people in the audience that can play. Wouldn't you be interested in hearing one of them?" And before like 1 second went by, your hand went up, and boy, you went right up there.
Well, the way I recall, basically what it was is I was in the audience and I asked her questions. I think I was asking her a question about Bill Evans, I believe, who she interviewed on her program. And we talked and she said, "Do you play? And would you like to come up?" And I said, "Heck yeah." Now, of course, I came knowing that was a possibility. I really did want to play with her. It was billed as a master class. But and I did play Stella by Starlight with her, and I did miss a couple of the changes again and again and again. And she said something, but she was wonderful. So
no, but I mean, you may remember I also got up there and played.
Yes, I do.
And I was scared to death. And I mean, I don't know, but it was amazing that you got up there and did that. And so, I mean, with seemingly no fear, but anyway, I got to know you better, and I still think you don't have any fear, but
I have an anxiety disorder, so I can't let fear slow me down because it's never going away. That's essentially my secret.
Is that what it is? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'm afraid of everything all the time.
Share that with the rest of the world.
Well, I've talked about it before, and it's part of what I do. I mean, helping people with anyone who has anxiety at any time is the same as me all the time. So I can help them with, what's making them nervous.
Well, that sounds like another topic for somebody.
For somebody, yeah.
That's a good one.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions for my guest, you can reach him. You can look him up on the Georgia State University website, and you'll be able to find him, Geoffrey Haydon. That's Geoffrey with a G-E-O. We hope you'll join us. Please like this interview if you enjoyed it, and let people know about these interviews. We're going to be talking to Joe Alterman in just a couple of weeks, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great night.